Hello everyone! Welcome to the Premium Collection YouTube channel. The topic of this video is Richest Countries in the World 2023. Before presenting this video, if you want to always watch the topics that will be presented from the Premium Collection, please subscribe to our channel. 10. San Marino. Tiny San Marino is the oldest republic in Europe and the fifth smallest country on the map. It may have only 34,000 citizens, but it is among the wealthiest citizenry in the world. It helps that income tax rates are very low, at about 1/3 of the EU average. Nonetheless, San Marino is working towards harmonizing its fiscal laws and regulations with those of the European Union, EU, and international standards. The tiny nation showed remarkable resilience during the pandemic and after amid tight monetary conditions and the energy crisis, with its tourism industry and manufacturing sector turning especially strong performances. 9. United States. Did we say that the richest countries are also the smallest? That is not the case, of course, with the United States, which managed to enter the top 10 list after teetering on its edges for the better part of the past 2 decades. Did Americans get richer during the pandemic? The top quintile of the U.S. population earning over $60,000 a year did. Many of them worked from home while their stock portfolios grew in value and they received stimulus checks on top of that. At the opposite end of the spectrum were Americans who lost their jobs and businesses, found themselves saddled with astronomical medical bills and lined up at local food banks. The job market has recovered since then, but inflation at a 40-year high is hurting those who are employed, particularly the nearly 52 million workers, close to 1/3 of the entire labor force, who are earning less than $15 an hour according to Oxfam America. At the height of the pandemic, research from the Americans for Tax Fairness, ATF, and the Institute for Policy Studies, IPS, found that the richest Americans held over 4 times more wealth than the roughly 165 million in the country's bottom half. In 1990, the situation was reversed. Billionaires were worth $240 billion and the bottom 50% held $380 billion combined. The collective wealth of America's billionaires leapt by $1.7 trillion from March 2020 to May 2022 according to Forbes, although their combined fortune decreased from $4.7 trillion to $4.5 trillion as markets retreated in 2022 according to the magazine's newest annual World's Billionaires list. Still, the U.S. remains home to more billionaires than any other country, 735. 8. Norway. Since the discovery of large offshore reserves in the late 1960s, Norway's economic engine has been fueled by oil. As Western Europe's top petroleum producer, the country has benefited for decades from rising prices. Until it didn't, prices crashed at the beginning of 2020, then the global pandemic ensued, and the krone was sent into freefall. In the second quarter of that year, Norwegian GDP fell by 6.3%, the biggest decline in half a century and possibly since World War II. Does that mean Norwegians became significantly less wealthy than they were before the pandemic? Certainly not. After the initial shock, the economy gradually pared the losses and closed the year at -1.2% GDP growth. Then in 2021 the economy rebounded, growing overall by almost 3.9% and around 3.3% in 2022. When it comes to any unforeseen economic problem, Norwegians can always count on their $1.3 trillion sovereign wealth fund, the world's largest. But unlike many other rich nations, Norway's high per capita GDP figures are a reasonably accurate reflection of the average person's economic well-being. The country has amongst the small set income inequality gaps in the world. 7. Switzerland. White chocolate, the bobsleigh, the Swiss Army knife, the computer mouse, the immersion blender, Velcro, and LSD are just some of the noteworthy inventions brought to the world by Switzerland. This country of about 8.7 million people owes much of its wealth to banking and insurance services, to tourism, and to the export of pharmaceuticals products, gems, precious metals, precision instruments, think watches, and machinery, medical apparatuses and computers. According to the 2022 Global Wealth Report by Credit Suisse, Switzerland once again came out on top when it comes to the mean average wealth per adult at a whopping $700,000. Furthermore, roughly 1 adult in 6 owns assets worth more than $1 million. Is it really a surprise that Switzerland has the highest density of millionaires in the world? Unfortunately, all of this largesse could not shield the Swiss economy from the effects of COVID-19. In 2020, production declined by 2.5%. Yet things could have been worse. Growth suffered less than in neighboring countries due to a swift policy response, emergency spending and containment measures, and due to the makeup of the economy itself, with its low dependency on contact-intensive sectors, competitive export industries, and solid public and household finances. Does that mean the Swiss don't have any economic worries at all? Not exactly. In March, Credit Suisse nearly imploded before a government-engineered rescue by its longtime rival, UBS Group. Not only has the demise of Credit Suisse shaken the country, it has damaged Switzerland's reputation as a secure and reliable global banking center with even more jobs at risk than the 9,000 already axed in a restructuring plan last year. 6. United Arab Emirates. Agriculture, fishing and trading pearls, these used to be the economic mainstays of this Persian Gulf nation. Then oil was discovered in the 1950s and everything changed. Today, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, highly cosmopolitan population enjoys considerable wealth. Traditional Islamic architecture mixes with glitzy shopping centers, and workers come from all over the world lured by tax-free salaries and year-round sunshine. Only about 20% of the people living in the country are actually locally born. The UAE's economy is also becoming increasingly diversified. Outside of the traditionally dominant hydrocarbon sector, tourism, construction, trade and finance are major industries. This is not to say that the UAE was not impacted by the pandemic and the concomitant fall of oil prices, quite the contrary. Incredible as it may seem, the UAE briefly slipped out of the IMF's ranking of the richest countries globally for the first time in decades. Yet fossil fuels have not gone out of fashion. As soon as energy prices recovered, the UAE quickly regained its historic position among the top 10 richest countries in the world. 5. Macau SAR. Just a few years ago, many were betting that the Las Vegas of Asia was on its way to becoming the richest nation in the world. Formerly a colony of the Portuguese Empire, the gaming industry was liberalized in 2001. This special administrative region of the People's Republic of China has seen its wealth growing at an astounding pace. With a population of about 700,000 and more than 40 casinos spread over a territory of about 30 square kilometers, this narrow peninsula just south of Hong Kong became a money-making machine. That, at least, was until the machine started losing money rather than making it. When COVID struck, global traveling came to a halt, and for a while Macau even slipped out of the 10 richest nations ranking. Today, after more than 3 years since the start of the pandemic, Macau is slowly returning to business as usual. Yet, it also is the only country on the list whose per capita purchasing power is lower than before the global health emergency. It was about $125,000 in 2019, down by more than $35,000 today. 4. Qatar. Despite the recent surge, oil prices have declined since the mid-2010s. In 2014, the per capita GDP of a Qatari citizen was over $143,222. 1 year later, it plunged significantly and remained below the $100,000 mark for the next 5 years. However, that figure has gradually grown, increasing by about $10,000 each year. Still, Qatar's oil, gas and petrochemical reserves are so large and its population so small, just 3 million, that this marvel of ultramodern architecture, luxury shopping malls and fine cuisine has managed to stay atop the list of the world's richest nations for 20 years. With only about 12% of the country's residents being Qatari nationals, the initial months of the pandemic saw COVID-19 spreading rapidly among low-income migrant workers living in crowded quarters. Quarantines, Curfews and lockdowns have been imposed more than once, and yet Qatar suffered one of the highest rates of positive cases in the region. Even so, the economy has proven to be resilient. It contracted by a relatively modest 3.5% in 2020, has grown roughly by 1.5% in 2021, and grew 4.2% in 2022 thanks to greater gas and oil revenues and tourists coming to see the World Cup. 3. Singapore. The richest person living in Singapore is the founder of the medical equipment firm Mindray, Lee Zitting, whose net worth is estimated at $15.6 billion. Brothers and property developers Robert and Philip Ng are second, and Goh Ching Liang of Whitlam Holdings, which manufactures paints and coatings, comes in third. In fourth place with assets of about $9.6 billion, although for many years he occupied the top spot of the ranking, is Eduardo Saverin, the co-founder of Facebook, who in 2011 left the US with 53 million shares of the company and became a permanent resident of the island nation. Saverin did not choose it just for its urban attractions or natural gateways. Singapore is an affluent fiscal haven where capital gains and dividends are tax-free. But how did Singapore attract so many high-net-worth individuals? When the city-state became independent in 1965, one half of its population was illiterate. With virtually no natural resources, Singapore pulled itself up by its bootstraps through hard work and smart policy, becoming one of the most business-friendly places in the world. Today, Singapore is a thriving trade, manufacturing, and financial hub, and 98% of the adult population is now literate. Unfortunately, that did not make it immune from the pandemic-driven global economic downturn. In 2020, the economy shrank by 3.9%, knocking the nation into recession for the first time in more than a decade. In 2021, Singapore's economy bounced back with 8.8% growth, but then the slowdown in China, a top trading partner, derailed the recovery. China's economic problems hit Singapore's manufacturing sector, which makes 21.6% of Singapore's total GDP, particularly hard, contracting by 6% in the first quarter of 2023. This in turn is dampening Singapore's fortunes, with its economy projected to expand by just 1.5% in 2023. 2. Luxembourg. You can visit Luxembourg for its castles and beautiful countryside, its cultural festivals or gastronomic specialties. Or you could just set up an offshore account through one of its banks and never set foot in the country again. Doing so would be a pity. Situated at the very heart of Europe, this nation of close to 650,000 has plenty to offer, both to tourists and citizens. Luxembourg uses a large share of its wealth to deliver better housing, healthcare, and education to its people, who by far enjoy the highest standard of living in the Eurozone. While the global financial crisis and pressure from the EU and OECD to reduce banking secrecy may have had little impact on Luxembourg's economy, the coronavirus outbreak forced many businesses to close and cost workers their jobs. But the country has weathered the pandemic better than most of its European neighbors. Its economy rebounded from -0.8% growth in 2020 to 5.1% growth in 2021. Unfortunately, that rebound did not last long. The economy grew by just 1.5% in 2022 and will likely reach only 1.1% this year thanks to lower business and consumer confidence and higher prices for energy and food. Weak economic growth may not be worth complaining about, though, given that Luxembourg topped the $100,000 mark in per capita GDP in 2014 and has never looked back ever since. 1. Ireland. Ireland appears unstoppable. Even before the pandemic, while the rest of Europe was facing all sorts of uncertainties, Brexit, trade tensions with the US, refugee and migrant crises to name a few, the Irish economy was humming along. In 2019, while the Eurozone's economy grew by a meager 1.5%, Ireland's expanded by over 5.4%, making it the fastest-growing economy in the bloc. Unlike almost every other nation, the global pandemic did not lead to economic contraction in Ireland but further growth, hitting 6.1% in 2020, followed by an astounding 13.5% in 2021, and an impressive 11% in 2022. Forecasts for 2023 are somewhat more conservative, 5.5%, but what nation wouldn't dream of achieving such a level of growth during a global recession? A nation of just 5 million inhabitants, Ireland was one of the hardest hit by the 2008 financial crisis. Following some politically difficult reform measures like deep cuts to public sector wages and restructuring its banking industry, the island nation regained its fiscal health, boosted its employment rates, and saw its per capita GDP almost double in a short amount of time. Do citizens feel 3 times as rich as a decade ago? Probably not. Ireland is one of the world's largest corporate tax havens, with ordinary people benefiting far less than multinationals do. And while they are undoubtedly better off than they used to be, according to data from the OECD, the national household per capita disposable income is in reality slightly lower than the overall EU average. With a considerable gap between the richest and poorest, the top 20% of the population earns almost 5 times as much as the bottom 20%. Most Irish families would likely balk at the idea that they are not just rich but among the richest in the world. Thank you all for watching this video till the end.